Yeah, welcome to episode 5 of the Negotiation Nuggets. In this 10-minute episode, I'm going to talk about what you fear about negotiating and what to do about it. Now, as humans, we all naturally experience fears around day-to-day life. And in negotiation, those fears can be absolutely heightened. What I've done is to distinguish the types of fears that most of us would experience into two categories: identity-related fears and environment-related fears. So let me talk to identity-related fears first. We fear rejection. So what if we negotiate and we are rejected by the other party? We fear looking bad. That could be looking bad either for being too assertive, too aggressive, or looking bad in the way that people might perceive us as being stupid if we've asked questions that might be uncomfortable. We also fear looking incompetent when it comes to an identity fear, and seeming inappropriate. So when we're negotiating, making the ask, the nervousness around leaning into that conversation and asking for what we want can leave us feeling like, what if the other party thinks we are being inappropriate for making that ask? This particular one comes up a lot when it comes to individuals and salary negotiations, but is absolutely prevalent in all types of negotiations, strong commercial negotiations. And in that, what we're fearing at a deeper level is the knowledge that we bring to the table potentially not being valued. And we fear not being valued for the contribution that we're making, and therefore making the ask and being able to see clearly whether someone else is going to value our contribution, value our argument, our position, and then knowing that they either do or they don't can be quite scary. So those are in a nutshell, the key identity fears we experience when it comes to negotiating. On the other side, we have what I call environment-related fears. And they link to examples such as, what if I am met with conflict in my negotiation? That's an environmental fear in this context because I'm leaning into the conversation, but what if I'm met with conflict from the other party? Secondly, what if I don't have enough information in the negotiation and the other party can outmaneuver me based on the information they've got, and I don't have enough to maneuver my way through a dialogue that gets me the outcome that I'm seeking? Then we have, what if I don't know what to say and I don't know what to do in a negotiation? There's fear around not knowing how to say something, and fear around not knowing how to do something. So that can be an environment in a negotiation where we don't lean in because we're scared of what might the requirement be for our actions and our words. And if we don't feel that we know how, or we don't have the capability, that's going to hold us back. And then I've got one around the fear of the unknown. Now, negotiating environments require us to plan, but a lot of what happens in the negotiation requires the agility to move around new information, to absorb new bits of data, and then still maneuver around that. And there can be a lot of fear attributed around the unknown. What if something I've not prepared for, or don't understand, comes up? Then what's going to happen next? So I want to, as I've talked to those fears in the first instance, I've got 6 minutes now to tell you what to do about those fears, because we've got identity-related fears and we've got environment-related fears. Now, what I want to talk to first is the environment-related fears, and then I'll come back to the identity ones. Now, when it comes to conflict as the environment fear, people not leaning into negotiations in the first place because of the fear of conflict, what I want you to ask yourself is, who do I need to become if I am met with conflict? Often it is this focus on, oh gosh, it's going to be uncomfortable. But if I've anchored in advance that I can imagine that I'm going to have a difficult conversation, what I'm requesting from my counterparty is going to be met with resistance, and therefore they are likely to lean into conflict because they're not going to accept our first proposal or our position, how am I going to respond? Having a plan around someone behaving in a conflicting way and preparing your emotional body around that is going to give you far greater power to be able to maneuver that scenario from being a high octane, high emotion negotiation into a way where you can neutralize the other party's emotions because you've been able to maintain a calm state in your own body. So I want you to think about when you're fearing conflict, who do you need to become and how can you anticipate that conflicting behavior and then recognize what activities and actions you can take to calm that situation down, to deregulate someone else's emotion so that you can neutralize the energy behind it. When it comes to not having enough information, a fear of not having enough information going into the negotiation, I've previously talked about 90% of your success in negotiation being linked to planning. Now, this planning requires you to think about not only what's needed in the room, but how you might influence the negotiation outside of the room and how you might need to design the deal in advance so that the execution of the negotiation is happening in a way that you can anticipate it to do. Now, when it comes to not having enough information, I want you to have a look at how much time actually are you spending planning? Because if that's the reason that you have a fear around negotiating, if you do that one small thing around increasing the amount of time you're spending planning, then you've got a greater level of confidence within that you have secured more time to plan, therefore have more information, therefore can show up with a level of knowledge and insight that can heed you well in the negotiation. When it comes to the fear around not knowing what to say or do, I want you to think about how you are practicing what you say and do. As with anything, if we want to get better at it, we have to make time to rehearse mentally the process of going through something, the process of anticipating what the other party might say and how they might respond. Now, when I was working back in my corporate career back in the UK, I worked for Twinings. And I worked directly with the group CEO and the group CFO. They were two formidable individuals, and I learned so much from them. One of the things they did every single quarter when we were going through reforecasting, budgeting, and then also presenting to the board on the financials was to role play the board meetings that they would be having with the Associated British Foods Board. And it was so incredibly powerful that they would spend the time, hours, going through the detail of the presentation, how they were forecasting, what they were doing, but also taking roles so that the other party could have a voice in the room, even if it was in a role play format. By doing that, they were able to condition their responses, get better at preparing, identify where there was missing information, go and extract that information, and then be in a position where they could influence the result of the business forecast in the way that was needed, but also be deemed to be highly prepared and organized in the board's eyes, because they absolutely were. So by giving that time and energy to practice, not only are you beating your fear around not knowing what to say or do, but that mental rehearsal, that resilience that is built by practicing in a safe environment is incredibly powerful. And then finally, around the environment, the unknown, what I want to say is life, we might think we have clarity and certainty around, but we absolutely don't. Now, if you wanted to know everything, it would be like the equivalent of going on a package holiday where you've chosen exactly where you're going, you know which hotel, you know how many meals are included, you know where your destination stops are, you know when you're going to be fed, what activity is going to happen when. And I would imagine by the end of that package holiday, if that was your life, you would be pretty bored by the idea of knowing absolutely everything that was going to be coming down the line. So I want to say around fear of the unknown, it's natural. So I don't want to dismiss that, but I also want you to consider the alternative. If you knew everything that was always going to happen, would that be exciting? Would it give you the opportunity to flex your spontaneity muscle, your intelligence, and grow? Probably not. So cut yourself some slack on not knowing and lean into the unknown actually being your friend as an opportunity to learn and grow from. To quickly switch over to the identity fears, because I know I'm at 10 minutes already, I'm just going to run through what I need you to consider. The key thing around the identity fears are this. When it comes to the fear of rejection and the fear of looking bad, they would be linked to ego. Ego does not want to look bad. We don't want to be rejected. And from a place of ego, we can't create value in deals, not to the fullest extent, because ego desires us to win. And if we only focus on winning, then we're going to harm relationships along the way. So one activity to practice, and it's too much for me to go through here, but I'll just share, is around working on surrendering your ego, to not letting your ego be in the driving seat, but instead act as the observer to go, isn't that fascinating? I can see the impact the fear of rejection is having on me, and therefore the choices I'm making either to act or not act as a result of that. Who's in charge of me? Is it me or is it my ego? I would be much rather in charge of myself than let my ego be in charge of me. And in negotiations, if you want to succeed, you absolutely have to be in charge of yourself to get the best outcome from the negotiation. When it comes to looking incompetent, the fear of incompetence, well, that's an easy one. Get educated. If you want to master negotiation, please don't expect to know it intuitively. It's not a download that we get from the universe that gives us these skills. We have to learn, commit time and discipline to them. There are plenty of ways that you can start learning to master negotiation that are cost effective, that can get you started. Start with books, start with podcasts, start with listening to these negotiation nuggets, but start somewhere in developing your education and your expertise, and trust that over time, that consistency and that cadence of learning will deeply start embedding in yourself, and you're doing things that you wouldn't have otherwise done, say, a year ago from now, had you not started learning. When it comes to seeming inappropriate, the answer to that is I want you to consider getting curious. So if you make an ask that you're worried about being inappropriate, instead of worrying about that seeming of being inappropriate and therefore not making the ask, make the ask and check in with the other party around how it's been received. Get curious, ask questions. Play back what they say to you. It seems that perhaps you might think this. Is that accurate? Test your reality around that. Because again, from an emotional intelligence perspective, if we don't reality test what is actually going on in the environment, rather than using our ego lens or our fear lens to understand the world, we're going to miss things. So instead of getting to the truth and to the heart of what someone might be actually seeing in your ask, you're going to be running that loop through your own narrative, and that's not going to serve you long term. And then the final one around not being valued for my knowledge and the fear of not being valued for your contribution and what you make. What I would say to that is you need to work on getting smarter in your positioning. In a salary negotiation specifically, if people don't make the ask because their fear of finding the truth of how they're really valued for their contribution to the organization, what hasn't happened in advance is appropriate and credible and authoritative positioning. And if you are waiting until at the end of the year or the end of your deal with a partner to start renegotiating and then not asking for what you need, you've waited too long. You need to be positioning in advance so that you can influence the perception of value from the outset, and it links back to being in charge. Okay, so I have totally gone over. I've made this 14 and a half minutes so far. So I'm going to leave it there for this week. So what do you fear about negotiating and what to do about it? I hope you've enjoyed that insight, and I will be back with you next week.